Our next speaker is a lawyer from Alaska. She was the first woman to serve as a trustee of the Rotary Foundation. Among her many accomplishments, not only as a Rotarian, but in life, she's part of the Alaskan Women's Hall of Fame.
La prochaine personne à venir nous parler est une avocate qui vient de l'Alaska, qui a été la première femme à servir comme trustee sur la Fondation Rotary. C'est aussi une membre des Temples de la Renommée des femmes de l'Alaska.
Carolyn, PDG Carolyn Jones has traveled all the way from Alaska to be with us here today. Please welcome her to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. I have traveled all the way from Alaska, and people say you've come a long way. It was longer than you can imagine. Between Anchorage and here, I encountered undelivered COVID test results, rejected arrived CAN applications, a delayed flight, a missed connection, and an 8.5-hour forced layover in Toronto. During that time, I shared a lot of WhatsApp messages with my aides, Juanita and Kim Won, and I finally was saying, getting to Timmins and District 7010 is going to be like arriving at the end of the rainbow and finding the pot of gold. And so here I am, and truly, you are golden, and I'm so happy to be here. I've enjoyed your conference and seeing how you do Rotary in 2 languages, and how you raise money. I'm taking home a couple of ideas for my district. So I'm going to tell you a story. It's my story. It's an American story. But if you listen, I think you will have some takeaways also for you here and there in what I have to say. It was May 25th, 2020, when 17-year-old Darnella Frazier, a black female in Minneapolis, Minnesota, stood her ground and with nothing more than a cell phone unflinchingly recorded the murder of George Floyd, a black male being subdued by a cop pinning his knee on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. During that time, George Floyd cried out that he couldn't breathe. He called out to his deceased mother. Onlookers pleaded with the officer to remove his knee as Floyd couldn't breathe. During that time, the officer looked up. He looked directly at the young lady recording him, and he was unmoved. And George Floyd died. It's been over 60 years since America's blacks began protesting for racial equality. I'm old enough to remember 1955 when Rosa Parks, a tired black woman in Alabama, boarded a bus, sat in the front seat, and refused to yield when a white passenger demanded his right. The Montgomery boycott followed for over a year and was recorded as the first large-scale U.S. demonstration against segregation, and ultimately the United States Supreme Court declared that segregated busing violated the United States Constitution. I remember the Greensboro, North Carolina sit-in, a civil rights protest in 1960, where some black college students staged a sit-in at a segregated lunch counter at a Woolworth's Five and Dime store. They were arrested for their conduct, but the protest had a lasting impact nationwide and forced Woolworths and other stores to alter their racist practices. And of course, I remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who led thousands of nonviolent demonstrators to the steps of the Capitol in Montgomery, Alabama, after a 54-mile, 5-day walk from Selma. They came to protest the lack of voting rights for African Americans, and that ultimately led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act in the United States. And during that same time, I remember living happily in Trieste, Italy, where I was the only person of color in the entire town, and the townspeople were thrilled to have me there. And like the sitcom Cheers, everybody knew my name. The Triestines loved me. But instead of hunkering down in my safe cocoon, I came home in 1967 because my country was burning and I wanted to be home to be a part of the solution. In a small way, my small way, I tried to do my part as a legal services poverty lawyer in California and later as a human rights lawyer in Alaska. And over time, I actually thought I saw progress, that I saw change. Until the evening of May 25th, 2020, when Darnella Frazier risked her own safety and the entire world saw the truth about how George Floyd died. And I thought, oh crap, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. Over 60 years, nothing has changed. It is true that rogue police officers around the U.S. continue to abuse, injure, and even murder Black people, and usually without accountability. But I am wrong. Something has changed. Darnella's quick thinking and courage changed the course of history in this country and sparked a new, more diverse movement than that of 60 years ago. Back in the late 50s and 60s, the people marching for peace and justice were almost all Black. But this time, all America is protesting. In one city, a line of middle-aged white women linked arms and stood in front of the protesters as a shield against law enforcement. In another city, the whites marching outnumbered the Blacks. A massive Black Lives Matter protest held in Nashville was organized by 6 teenagers, Black and white, who met over Facebook. They wanted to honor the memory of George Floyd. A 9-year-old little white girl in Ohio gave an impassioned speech that Black Lives Matter at one of the first protests. Researchers say these protests, now in their 16th month, are the largest in U.S. history, having spread to well over 650 towns and cities in all 50 states. We have seen a real and meaningful change in public opinion on racial issues and policing. In America, the sports world has a huge platform, and it is speaking out at every level. 70 members of the Denver Broncos football team marched in protest to the state capitol. The National Football League commissioner changed his stance and now endorses peaceful protests by the players. The San Antonio Spurs basketball coach, Greg Popovich, has called on white people to call out racism no matter the consequences. Coach K of the Duke University Blue Devils basketball team defined the Black Lives Matter movement not as a political issue, but a human rights issue. The Southeastern Conference Commissioner announced that championship college sports events would not be held in Mississippi until the Confederate flag emblem was removed from the state flag. Months later, the Mississippi state endorsed and approved a new flag with the magnolia flower. The Ole Miss and Oklahoma football teams, including their head coaches, marched together for social justice. The University of Illinois football team changed their helmets to include messages of social justice and a black fist. NASCAR, the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing, no longer flies the Confederate flag at its car races. This year, the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic committees changed their rule about protests. No longer would there be a punishment if you raised a fist or took a knee. And even the International Olympic Committee recognized the futility of continuing to ban protests and changed its rules to permit limited, non-disruptive protests in Tokyo. And most recently, Major League Baseball recognized the Negro Baseball League. Players, all Black, played baseball from 1920 to 1948 in a league of their own, but now their achievements have been included in the Major League Baseball statistics as a part of Major League Baseball history. It genuinely feels like a national racial reckoning, a reckoning extending beyond the sports world. Disney has rethemed Splash Mountain, its amusement, because of the racial stereotypes from the film it's based upon. HBO pulled the film Gone with the Wind from its catalog until it could provide some clarity and historical context. NASA, our U.S. National Space Agency, has renamed its headquarters after Mary Jackson. She was the agency's first African-American female engineer and was featured in a film you may have seen, Hidden Figures. Princeton University is renaming its Woodrow Wilson Residential College after a Black female alumna and donor in rejection of Wilson's promotion of segregation and supported the Ku Klux Klan. And a little known fact, of our 50 states, one of our tiniest states had a full name not known by most people. Until this year, it was called the State of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. And in 2020, the residents voted to eradicate the words and Providence Plantations. It's now merely the State of Rhode Island. And for those of you who are TV watchers, the TV reality shows The Bachelor and The Bachelorette led to a racial reckoning this year after there was a belated reveal of racist conduct by the frontrunner for the heart of the first Black Bachelor. The show's longtime host departed, and a search for a new host is ongoing. Since these protests, you have seen genuine and sincere movement, action, to examine and change disrespectful and racist names of our sports teams. Today, the national football team in our nation's capital is known only as the Washington Football Team. And the Major League Baseball team in Cleveland, Ohio, has also removed its Native American name. We are working on changing racist images in our marketing, on our pancake box, our pancake syrup label, rice box, ice cream bar, butter packaging, and even the name of one insurance company. We are removing racist symbolism, such as the statues of Confederate generals or U.S. presidents who were racist or slave owners. We're removing the names of Confederate generals from our military bases. And even the long-time name Dixie has been abandoned by country western singers, a beer label, a weather report, and a university. Countless businesses, organizations, and individuals have issued written statements condemning racism. Our own Rotary International issued its own statement on racism in June 2020 and followed with establishing the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee chaired by our own RI Director, Valerie Wafer. The purpose of the committee was to support and train the board and trustees and to assist clubs in their effort to improve DEI in their membership and Rotarian experience. And this change in the air is not just in the US. In fact, the entire world has been protesting with us. London, Rome, Berlin, Toronto, Jerusalem, Dublin, Tokyo, Paris, Sydney, Melbourne, Lebanon. They've protested. Formula One race car drivers at the Austrian Grand Prix were wearing shirts that read, "End Racism," and they took a knee. BTS, the Korean boy band, contributed $1 million to the Black Lives Matter movement and asked its fans to match, and the fans did it. The city of Paris inaugurated a public garden honoring Solitude, a pregnant freed slave who had been jailed for her activities to liberate slaves on the Caribbean island of Guadeloupe. She gave birth in jail and was executed the following day. Last December, French and Turkish soccer players, walked out of a match after accusing a referee of making a racist remark. The game only continued after a new group of referees were sent in, and a Norwegian member of parliament nominated the Black Lives Matter movement for the Nobel Peace Prize. So today's civil rights movement doesn't resemble the civil rights movement I remember of the 1960s. Today, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of white people have taken to the street, thousands of whom have been tear gassed, beaten, or chased down by the police. Perhaps, not coincidentally, there's never been a movement when the authorities, school boards, city councils, mayors, seem so willing to embrace policies that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Most recently, the city of Evanston, Illinois, became the first U.S. city to vote reparations for Black residents. And the governor of Maryland recently signed a bill providing $577 million in funding to the state's 4 historically Black colleges and universities. These changes are a reflection that white America in increasing numbers is finally waking up. But we're not done at home until we tackle the harder stuff, institutional or systemic racism, too long embedded as a normal practice in our society. It's led to discrimination in criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, political power, and education. Tackling these issues means getting justice for George Floyd and those who went before him and even followed after him, dead or abused at the hands of excessive police force. Tackling these issues means leveling the educational playing field and ensuring that minority and disadvantaged children have equal access to an education that can lift them up. Tackling these issues means equal employment opportunities. So, Rotarians, I want to toss out a few examples of how you can make a difference and change lives. In the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on one area where institutional racism should be adjusted and where you can make a difference as an individual or organization. Now, I realize I'm talking to Canadians, and I don't know your situation, and I don't know what problems you had, but you know. And so you can examine the life around you, the institutions around you, and what I say, and perhaps there's something helpful. My examples today are going to be limited to education, and especially how you can make a difference in these pandemic times. Distance learning has been producing a lost generation of kids and deepening the divide between the rich and the poor. Consider the impact of pandemic-related school closings and distance learning on disadvantaged children. Many minorities are low-income parents who need to work. They can't stay home and teach their kids when school's closed. They may lack the academic background suited to teach these kids. They may speak English as a second language or not at all. They don't have access to computers or internet, or maybe they have one computer and several kids are fighting for the use of that one device. There may not be adequate space in the home for quiet time to do homework. So these already disadvantaged kids are falling further behind with the loss of education. How do you recover a lost half year? A year? Do you ever? So here are some suggestions to help these kids. Pick a school in a low-income neighborhood. Ask the principal what the school needs. Here are some possibilities where you might be able to help that school. Establish a reading program. Provide volunteer tutors, books, backpacks, computer tablets. How about flashcards, educational toys, finger puppets of diverse historical figures for classrooms and school libraries? Contribute copies of The Hill We Climb and Change Sings by Black Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman. Provide a video recording of her delivery at the U.S. presidential inauguration this year. Recognize special educators. Could a Teacher of the Month be named who inspires minority kids as a role model for minority kids, teaches respect for diversity in the classroom? Finance or chaperone a class for a field trip to a local museum or something similar. Designate an annual scholarship as encouragement or motivation for a kid who may not have the best grades, but has demonstrated an effort to turn his or her life around and could use that little bit of extra support. On a more individual and personal note, why don't you buy dolls, toys, books, choose TV shows and movies for your kids and grandkids that show them people from different races, religions, and nationalities. And back home, we're encouraging Rotary clubs and Rotarians to make a contribution through their will to historically Black college and universities and the American Indian College Fund. If you change the life of a little child, remember me, I was once that little child. RI President Shekhar Mehta's Rotary theme for this year is Serve to Change Lives. This is your opportunity to change lives by taking action to eradicate racism, secure justice, build peace. And more than that, I offer you the opportunity to be on the right side of history. And thank you for letting me tell you my story.
Juanita Hodgson is our district governor nominee.
Juanita Hodgson est notre nommée au niveau du district. Merci de venir sur l'estrade.
Good morning. I have the privilege and the honor to facilitate this very dynamic woman to come to our area. And she's a dynamo, let's just say. When she said, "Do you have WhatsApp?" I'm like, I do, but only because I never communicate with my YEX students who come to Canada to learn and to embrace the culture that they don't know. And in your speech this morning, it's about learning. If we start with that generation, then we make the biggest change because that it becomes the norm. And if we can create that change, it's incredible. So I live to be as brave and powerful as you've been, just with words. So thank you. Thank you for coming today.